want to share with afterwards.
Yeah, we're now recording. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. By the way, this photo was chosen today as the photo winner for the 2019 Friends of the Columbia Gorge photo contest. Pretty amazing. Catherine Creek on a chilly December morning. Having trouble with my advancing. So what is the management plan? It's basically a 500-page rule book that governs both development and protection within the scenic area, not including the 13 urban areas. Just applies to the land outside the cities. And it governs things such as if you build a new house, what sort of screening does it need? What color is the house? How reflective of your window are your windows? Basically, all of that is to protect the scenic resources of the gorge. So this is the official Gorge Commission page that was the start of a webinar they gave last week or a week and a half ago. And the process is called Gorge 2020. And it's being put on by the Columbia River Gorge Commission and the U.S. Forest Service. And you can access this program, you can review it on their website if you like. So what is the Gorge Commission? It's kind of a political body. Each of the gorge counties gets to select one gorge commissioner, and then 3 gorge commissioners are appointed by both Oregon and Washington's. We're up to a total of 12. And then there's 1 non-voting member from the U.S. Forest Service for a total of 13 commissioners. The Gorge Commission has a professional staff of 6 located in White Salmon. They're next to the White Salmon Library. And then the Forest Service, which is a separate unit, not part of the Mount Hood or the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, is located in Hood River. And the Gorge Commission meets monthly in a different gorge community each month, and they're equally funded by Oregon and Washington. The changes to the management plan are available on the Gorge Commission website. There are also summaries available, two-page summaries, which are kind of handy. And you can access that. Any of these links are active. And if you want to receive a copy of this presentation after we're done, I can include this. So tonight we're going to cover 3 areas. I'm going to talk about urban area boundaries. Ryan is going to talk about climate change. And then together we'll cover natural resources. So this is Dalles, the Dalles and Dallesport. You can see they're size-wise, it's a big amount of land. And as you may know, the Dalles is very eager to expand. Whereas on the other side of the river, there's tons of undeveloped and open land that is designated to be developed in an urban setting. Just to give you some perspective, this is Hood River on the left, the Hood River's urban area. Here's Mosier, a little further east is Lyle. And then we've got Dallesport and the Dalles. As I mentioned before, there are 13 urban areas comprising 28,500 acres. And it's about 10% of the gorge is comprised of urban areas. And you can see that many of them are clustered where there are bridges. So Cascade Locks has a bridge over to Washington, close by Stevenson, Hood River, Binge and White Salmon, the Dalles, Dallesport, and that'll become important as we talk about this in just a minute. So we already touched on the fact that there's 13 urban areas comprising 10% of the scenic area. And in the National Scenic Act, only minor revisions are allowed, and it requires a supermajority of the Gorge commissioners to approve it. The Scenic Act also requires regional analysis, and uniform standards have to apply. However, out of the 13 urban areas, five of them are unincorporated, which means it's hard to develop there because either the community or the county has not incorporated that area. That's over 1/3 of the urban area acreage. There's also no urban planning, and there's also a surplus of urban lands. So one of the big issues is been defining what a minor revision means. This has been a political football ever since the act was created. And in the act, there are 4 criteria. They're referred to as the 4F criteria. Number 1, there must be a demonstrable need for long-range population growth or the economy. Number 2, any expansion must be consistent with the standards of the management plan. Number 3, there must be maximum efficiency of land use. And number 4, no significant reduction of agricultural, forest, or open space lands. So taking the example of the Dalles and Dallesport, they already have a regional approach to land use. In September, the Gorge Commission directed its staff to develop policies for regional urban area boundary planning and to focus on those areas where there were bridges between communities. For example, the Dalles and Dallesport. In subsequent meetings, a majority of the commissioners voted and agreed to these policies to limit urban sprawl. Number 1, requiring a regional analysis of the development potential in all the existing urban areas. And number 2, defining a minor revision to be up to 20 acres or 1% of the land area of the urban area, whichever is less, cumulative over time. These are the provisions that are in the draft plan now, but the Dalles, Wasco County, and the Port of the Dalles, as well as Klickitat County, are trying to throw them out. From our perspective, the Dalles doesn't need a boundary expansion. There's more than adequate land for residential development. This has been shown by Department of Land Development and Conservation with the state of Oregon. There's also surplus land zoned for industrial and commercial use, although in a meeting today with the Wasco County Commission, they disputed this. The Dalles has also not reinvested in downtown development. They preferred to do things like a super Walmart and other expansions out into their commercial areas. And their use of the Port of the Dalles has not used their land efficiently.
Peter, we have a quick question.
Sure.
Judy would like you to define cumulative over time as it pertains to this.
In other words, that would be the maximum expansion that any city would be allowed. That's the way it's written right now. Um, Dallesport has over 6,500 acres of undeveloped land, and the Dalles is already the co-owner of 1,000 acres. That includes the airport and a new business park, as well as infrastructure. This is a page from their brochure. As they're advertising, 35 acres and 17 lots, all shovel ready. And the Dalles is engaged in a bi-state airport board that's between the Dalles and Klickitat County. And they do joint economic development planning already. So our contention is the Gorge Commission needs to hold firm, to hold fast on the rules that are currently in place in the draft management plan. And we would ask if you support this, to advocate for retention of those standards. In terms of public commenting, there's an opportunity to comment tomorrow night orally between 5:30 and 7:30. You have to go to this webinar registration link that's on the Gorge Commission page. Here it is down here. And each person will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes. You can also turn in written comments. Those are due June 30th. And this may be one of the last opportunities to comment. Basically, the commission will meet again in July. Public comment will be allowed on what will be the final draft. And then at their meeting in August, they will approve changes, the final changes. And at that point, the management plan will be adopted, subject to concurrence by the Department of Agriculture. So our suggested comments are on one page, double-sided. Again, we can send this to you. It's also on our comment links. And welcome. You can comment on all of this or any part of it. This is the section right here that deals with urban areas. So, Ryan, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, thanks, Peter. And yeah, if you have some slides you want to put up to pertain to what I'm saying, feel free. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your evening to hang out with us here and learn more about the management plan and what Friends of the Columbia Gorge is concerned about. Again, for those of you, if you're wondering if you'd like to ask a question, by far the easiest way to do it is to type it in the chat box, which you can access by clicking on the little chat button at the bottom of your screen. I will see that, Peter will see that. If you do need to speak or ask a question, you can also raise your hand or just unmute yourself. You should all have the ability to unmute yourselves, since this is a meeting and not a webinar. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to cover climate change pretty quickly, try to keep it a bit short and sweet. Yeah, one of our biggest concerns since the beginning of management plan review, which started almost 3 years ago, was climate change. The existing management plan has no mention of climate change at all anywhere in it. And probably the biggest reason for that is because it had only been updated once since the passage of the Scenic Area Act in 1986. So it's definitely a good thing that the Gorge Commission is going through this management plan review. It's long overdue, and they are starting to implement some climate change language. However, we had been pushing all this time for more effort to be spent on it, and unfortunately it kept getting sort of delayed and pushed back. We kept getting told that everything that would be reviewed in the management plan would have a climate change analysis associated with it, but that didn't happen either. And very frustratingly, the commission has spent a hugely inordinate amount of time on the issue of the urban area boundaries that Peter just covered. Most of the public meetings, I think it's safe to say, well, maybe not most of them, but certainly a majority of the public meetings that they've held and the planning sessions that they've held and everything else has been spent on listening to cities basically complain that they're not being allowed to expand their urban area boundaries. And that's come at the expense of all the other numerous issues that we care about, and primary among them is climate change. So there are some things, as I said, that the Gorge Commission has started to look at, but it kind of feels like it's being slapdash put together at the 11th hour, and there's still a lot that needs to go into this that hasn't yet. Amongst that is we would really like them to see them adopt a one-year target date to adopt a climate action plan. Right now, it's just kind of open-ended. Oh, we have a question. Oh, Jeff is wondering if it's better for you to comment as a board member or individual. I'm not sure, Jeff. I think that's mostly up to you, whatever you prefer. So yeah, so right now the Gorge Commission doesn't have a hard date set for adoption of a climate action plan. We would like them to set a date, hopefully no more than 1 year out, at least as a goal, at the very least. We would also like to see them incorporate into the management plan prohibition of destruction or loss of any wetlands. We would like to see them, because wetlands are very important habitat, especially in helping to mitigate the effects of climate change and to help sensitive species that will be impacted by climate change. We would like to see them limit new dwellings on forest land in anticipation of increased rates and severity of forest fires. Since climate change is probably going to make them more severe and more frequent, having more dwellings out in forest lands areas are going to put more people at risk. So let's keep our forest lands separate from where we're building new dwellings. We would like to see them require coordinated temporary closures of recreation sites during extreme risks of fire. There's already numerous places throughout the state of Oregon and Washington and around the country that are already doing that sort of thing. We would like to see them prevent conversion of forest lands to residential or agricultural lands. Big forest lands, especially forest lands with old growth trees on them, are incredibly good carbon sinks. So the more old trees you can keep and the more trees you can keep for longer will represent a really valuable carbon sink or carbon offset. So we would also like to see them improve pond and lake buffers to protect vital species habitats, such as the western pond turtle and pika. We would also like to see them link those buffers to the natural resources chapter that we'll talk about in a second, and to plan and protect for what's expected to be increased water temperatures and reductions in seasonal flows. Climate change is likely to cause both those things, already is in many places. And we would also like to see them prioritize limits on development and transportation of fossil fuels, such as pipelines or rail expansions, because obviously climate change is being caused by fossil fuels. So, and that about does it for our main priorities still on climate change. And again, this is not looking to the Gorge Commission to ask them to somehow solve climate change. That's well beyond the purview of what they can do. This is about getting the Gorge Commission to address climate change and to look at what they can do to help plan and mitigate within the purview of their responsibilities and within the scenic area itself for climate change and the expected impacts of climate change. So just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody. All right, so if there's no questions on that, I'm not seeing any, or I'm not seeing any hands raised. Actually, I don't know if you can raise hands in meetings. That might just be a webinar function. But I'll start in on natural resources. Then Peter, if you want to pick up anything I miss. I've just got 3 points on natural resources. That's a separate chapter, but of course, there's many connections between natural resources and our concerns over climate change. One of our primary things we'd still like to see is that they apply what's called a no loss standard to wetlands protections. So we don't want to see any reduction in wetlands within the National Scenic Area. And we'd like to see increased protection for salmon, trout, turtles, pika, and other sensitive species by increasing habitat protections and buffers for them. So what does that mean? Well, right now we've targeted and would like to see an increase to 200 feet buffers for all streams and rivers to help protect salmon and trout and the other aquatic species. And we would like to see a buffer of 330 feet for lakes, ponds of any suitable habitat for the western pond turtle and similar species. Judy has another question. Are there models on water resources in Gorge area predicting outcomes of climate change? Not that I know of. Our land trust has been doing some geomapping of the gorge, but that does not include impact. That's just geological planning for climate change. It doesn't include things like water resources or flora and fauna impacts. There probably are some models out there. I'm just not aware of them. I would love to see the Gorge Commission do and commission more models like that on water, not just water resources, but everything that's expected to be impacted by climate change. But as far as I know, there's no specific models yet, at least that I've seen, predict what's going to happen with water resources.
There actually are. The EPA has conducted modeling by regions of the country, and they've done one for the Pacific Northwest. And what's forecast to be happening is lower stream flows, which is going to increase the temperature. And specifically, I saw a set of statistics that is talking about removal of the 4 Snake River dams and how that would help with water temperatures. But the
there is that I'd forgotten about.
The current reservoir that's the hottest is the reservoir that's backed up by the John Day Dam. But if there was more water flow from the Snake River, it would definitely help.
That's great. Peter, you don't happen to have a link to that EPA modeling study, do you?
I can look for it once we're done with the presentation. I could put it in the chat.
If he's able to find that before the presentation, we'll share the link in chat. But Judy and anyone else who would like to see that, you can email me or Peter with that question to follow up. My email is just ryan@gorgefriends.org, and Peter's is just peter@gorgefriends.org. And I've put my email in the chat. So yeah, the final point on natural resources that I have is that we also would like to see prohibition of adverse effects to all priority habitats. Kind of already went over this, but specifically any activities such as mining, logging, or development within any and all habitats that are suitable to sensitive species, such as talus slopes for pika. That's a ideal habitat for pika. Even if they're not currently observed living there, the pika do move, so any talus slope should be considered habitat for pika in the gorge and be protected from mining and development. So yeah, I will, and now I will share the comment link that we have. And Peter, did you have more you wanted to add on natural resources?
I think you covered it, Ryan. I'm going to look for the link to the water temperature issue. But let's open it up to any other questions.
Yeah.
If people want to unmute and we can have some Q&A.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name is Deb. I'm one of the Ds of D&D. We were just wondering about how efforts to conserve forests dovetail with both respective states' departments of forestry or departments of agriculture. I'm not sure what's correct, but we've just seen various parcels of land that have been clear cut. And when we've contacted folks at the Gorge Commission office, they've said, oh, well, that's under the purview of the Oregon Department of Forestry, and they have nothing to say about it, yeah, so we're wondering about how the commission's control and those controls might dovetail, and then also replanting, how does that figure into things?
Great question. So I'll try. I hope I'll cover everything. And Peter, feel free to chime in if I leave anything off. But in the National Scenic Area, there's 2 major important distinctions to understand between land designation. There's 3 really. The third one is urban areas, though. The Gorge Commission doesn't regulate anything that happens in urban areas, however. So the other 2 designations are special management area and general management area. In the special management areas, that's sort of a more protected designation. So clear cutting is already not allowed in SMA lands. One of the compromises that was made when the National Scenic Area was passed back in 1986 was that it can get a little complicated, but in general, if you were a private landowner back then, your land was grandfathered out of any of those SMA protections for clear cutting, so that people who had lumber interests in the National Scenic Area could still have lumber interests and be able to sell their lumber. So any of the clear cuts, I think that I know of off the top of my head, are on GMA lands. We would love to see the Gorge Commission start applying more of the special management area protections to the GMA lands if they can, and seeing landowners voluntarily opt into those. Special management forest practices, things like selective cutting and stuff like that is much more, well, it's much less taxing on the ecosystem. Still has an impact, of course, but it's nowhere near as bad as clear cutting. In terms of the agencies directly responsible, yeah, I mean, outside of the scenic area, the National Forest Service has a lot of control over it. They are a big landowner in the Gorge as well. However, most of the national forest land in the Gorge will be in SMA land. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any Forest Service land in the Gorge that has been clear cut. I don't think any of it ever has. And we would, of course, oppose the Forest Service ever doing a timber sale, and it would be against current Gorge Commission rules. So any of the clear cuts that you're seeing in the Gorge, of which there are a number, unfortunately, are on private land. The most recent clear cut that's ongoing is up above Hood River, and it's on land that is now owned by Weyerhaeuser, the big lumber company. And unfortunately, there's not much the Gorge Commission can do right now to stop that. We've made efforts in the past to try to raise awareness in the public eyes and put public pressure on the private companies that own a lot of that timberland, asking them to do selective logging instead, things like that. But so far, it hasn't borne fruit. So yeah, I hope I answered your question there. If there's anything else, any specifics you'd like me to address, otherwise please let me know. But mostly in the National Scenic Area, if you see clear cutting, it's because it's on private land.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I have one other maybe unrelated question, but do you feel it's more effective to do the oral public comment or to write?
I think the most effective comments are unique comments. So I encourage people, to, send in, if the least you can do is send in a copy of our suggested talking points, please do. That's better than nothing. But the Gorge Commission gets a lot of those. It's even better if you can, use our talking points as much as you want, use them for reference. But if you can personalize your comments, that will be the most useful. And as far as I'm concerned, both are useful. Testifying, well, not in person because we don't do that anymore these days, but testifying orally tomorrow during the meeting is probably the most impactful. I would recommend doing both if you're going to. That way the Gorge Commission gets your written comment a little bit ahead of time so that they have some time to go over it. The staff has some time to go over it. But yeah, testifying live during meetings, sorry about my barking dogs in the background, is one of the best ways of staying engaged with these agencies, and it's very effective. Okay, thanks.
I have, I'm going to share my screen again, Judy. This comes directly from the EPA climate impacts to the Pacific Northwest. Let's see, I've got to change this up here. Okay, so three different pictures here. The first one, Columbia Basin temperatures. You can see between the years of 1970 and 1999, temperatures were okay. Starting to get a little pink, which indicates fatal for salmon. But the 2040 projections are really into the red zone, which Salmon don't like it above basically 70 degrees. And so removal of those Snake River dams is really getting critical. Then the other chart, which is kind of hard to read, but by 2040, the brownest areas are showing 40 to 50% less stream flow. So that's especially in the Cascades and the eastern mountains. So does not look good for salmon.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have another question. It's Deb again. I'm getting chatty. Do you know the reason for the reduced river flows in the spring? Is that there's less snow, or?
There's actually going to be the amount of precipitation is going to be similar, but there'll be less snow that will happen. We're getting more and more rain on snow events. If you're a skier or a snowboarder, you're familiar with the fact that there's lots of days up at Meadows or Timberline where it's just hovering around 30, 32 degrees. And so we're getting a mist, a rain condition on top of snow. And that is actually responsible for the event that happened on Mount Hood. I think it was probably 12 years ago that formed the Hood River Delta. We had a rain on snow event that just created this huge washout and took millions of acres, cubic feet of material down the Hood River and closed Highway 35 for a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course it's that difference. That difference might, on the surface to some people maybe like, well, the precipitation's the same, so what? But of course, having the longer lasting snowpack means you have more consistent flows throughout the whole year. But especially with it getting hotter and hotter later into the summer, you end up having, and then on top of that, you end up having reduced flows during those months because the snowpack is mostly gone by that point. That's what's really creating the problem. And you combine that with the dams and everything else that's stressing the salmon. And because one of the other things the dams do is they create a series, it takes a river system, and basically the Columbia is no longer a river system. It's a series of lakes that just connect to one another. That's what the dams have turned it into. And because of that, the temperature is higher in the water because it's not flowing as much. So all of that combining is affecting the temperature. It's raising the temperature. And as Peter said, it doesn't take much to start making this an impossible situation for the salmon. So yeah, they're very climate sensitive species.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks for all the good news.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, Jeff Carr here, Friends board member.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, good to see you guys. You guys are doing a great job, and I've always said this is a very technical area.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your work diving into this stuff. And I've always thought, is there a way to just get, for a person that's not totally immersed in this, to make 3 points very quickly? That's one way to personalize that approach, or to go a little bit more detailed. What I'm going to try to do is take your talking points, because I know that the commission really, looks at all these things coming in at them, saying the same thing over and over again. And they kind of like go, well, that's friends talking. So I'm going to try to take your points and try to personalize them in my own way and say, this is what I understand. This is what I hear. And again, that was my question about an individual or a friend's board member. They know I'm talking to you. That's fine. You give us the information, but I guess my question is, I'm going to draw up some comments. Can I run them by you first?
Oh yeah, you can always reach out to us.
I don't want to be straying across, say something the wrong way, and then you go, oh my gosh, what did he do? Anyway.
Oh God, Jeff said something terrible. No, that's fine. And yeah, I think your point is a good one. And I forgot to kind of do that, is boil it down to like 3 quick points. And I think if I had to do that, I would say try to cover each of these main priorities, one by saying, don't expand urban area boundaries. And that's a good summary of our concerns on urban areas. It's just, we want to preserve and protect the natural areas of the gorge. And if you start allowing expansion of urban areas, that's ruining and deteriorating the gorge. So just don't allow urban expansions. That's a perfectly fine position to take. And it's certainly a position I share. And then in terms of climate change and natural resources, just say, we want you to adopt a climate action plan within a year, and we want you to study all of the expected impacts, particularly the impacts on natural resources, and how you're going to mitigate and plan and help accommodate the most sensitive species in the gorge to climate change. And I think those are the three main points.
So I like that. I like that approach because that's direct, it's forceful, and I just really like it because I just don't know the details like you guys do. And that's really hit the big ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, it's almost at every meeting we've been to, even though we keep writing out these pretty detailed and lengthy comments and have been for 3 years now, we often get comments from some commissioners saying, well, can you just get us more specifics and more information? And it's like, well, you're the commission. Your staff should be making the time to commission the studies to find out, what really is going on. We're not a scientific organization. We're a nonprofit environmental group. So, I'd love to see the Gorge Commission actually, get more detailed information for themselves that's from an independent third party. Because, people also accuse us of being, biased. And so if the Gorge Commission just started doing what we said, they would get a lot of flack for it. So I'd love to see them commission some meaningful studies on all these impacts to natural resources in the gorge from climate change. That's what they should have been doing starting 3 years ago, but they haven't.
They actually, for years ago, they had something called the Vital Signs Indicator Project.
Right.
It's still on their webpage, on their website. You can look it up, but you can tell it's been neglected and not any energy has been put into it. But in their proposed some of the changes to the climate plan, they're talking about reinvigorating that. And that really is exactly what Ryan talked about. It's indicators for a whole range of different aspects of the gorge: scenic resources, natural resources, recreational resources, and kind of standards and benchmarks. So that's a good thing to advocate for as well. Yeah. Bringing back the Vital Signs Indicators Project.
Yeah, and they've talked about that a little bit, but I think they need more public pressure behind it. And, they complain a lot about not having enough funding, and it's true, the Gorge Commission could use more funding, but there's also an issue of just prioritizing better and allocating funds to where it's most needed. And like I said, they've wasted a lot of time in this plan review process on things that really they just shouldn't have been spending as much time on, and everything else has suffered because of it. So, and now we're at the 11th hour. So,
Ryan, did you note that there's going to be a lot of folks commenting on tomorrow night from the perspective of opening up the urban growth boundaries and all that crap? So we just got to be there.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. The Wasco County Commission had a meeting today that Peter and I were both on, and some of the other municipalities have signed resolutions in opposition to the proposed changes regarding urban area boundary expansions. The funny thing is, though, it's not really changing anything all that much. It's doing one thing that they all wanted to see the commission do, which was make a more clear definition of what minor revision means. So that's what they attempted to do. And the baseline they arrived at was basically just the simplest bare minimum that all commissioners could agree on would constitute minor. And it's not, they all agreed that this would equal minor. So yeah, it's pretty frustrating. And the attitude coming out of a lot of these places is rather frustrating, because they seem to have no interest in actually preserving and protecting the natural areas of the gorge. They just want carte blanche to expand to the urban areas and do urban sprawling development, even though they have plenty of land, as Peter said and pointed out, even according to their own studies commissioned by their own governments, showing that they have plenty of room for development in their urban areas already. So yeah, it's very frustrating and it's very disappointing to see, especially with a lot of misinformation flying around out there. But that seems to be run of the mill these days in politics. So Judy has another question, or comment anyway. For people, just rain means less percolation into the aquifers landowners rely on, increased developed, perhaps reducing water resources. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what you're saying there, Judy, but
more development
yeah.
equals more pressure on
Yeah.
water resources, and that's happening in Mosier. More people are moving in there. They have a limited water supply, and the water table is dropping precipitously for the people up on top. So it's been a major problem. Commingled wells, yeah, especially for communities like Mosier. White salmon has got water issues. Yeah, you're right, Judy. And just to kind of add a little bit to what Ryan said, this morning we heard a Wasco County commissioner state that it's the people from Portland that want to restrict how we use the gorge, and kind of like we know better. So it's a national scenic area.
Any other questions? We're coming up on 50 minutes, so perhaps we should call it there, Peter.
Sounds good. Thank you all for attending, and we hope that you'll provide comments and guidance to the Gorge Commission. They're asking and wanting your comments.
Yep. Yeah, thank you all again for showing up today.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Being engaged.
Thank you.
Hey, Arlene. All right, hope to see you all tomorrow night. Bye-bye.
Bye.